very much, Claire, for that introduction, and congratulations to Sussex LRC, who have a great tradition of organising these fringes in this wonderful venue. And it'll be a loss when we're in, well, Manchester's a great place, and the place where the TUC was founded, that's why it's there next year to celebrate 150 years. I wanted to those who've been in Congress know that I spoke about Grenfell Tower yesterday, and I do want to take an opportunity to develop some of those points, because I think Grenfell Tower is a political issue, and I'll come on to that. It's an issue which has the potential, has already created something of a political crisis for the Tory government, and it's the sort of thing which, in theory, could bring governments down. The fact that at least 80 people die in their own homes in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, in the capital city, London, of one of the wealthiest countries in the world, says something horrific about the society we live in. And I think that actually that is a political question. There are technical questions that go alongside that, but that's a political question which the Labour movement needs to take up, because there are people calling out for justice as a result of that crime that took place in Grenfell Tower. It goes to the heart of the debate about housing. And the truth is, if you look historically, across the world, most workers, while we've lived under the capitalist system, most workers, in terms of housing, have been put into poor quality, high cost, cheap, nasty housing. And that's if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, place where I grew up in Manchester, which Engels described workers' living accommodation as the classic slum. That's what workers were put into when the Industrial Revolution took place. And it's been, our experience of it has been coloured because there was a period where things seemed to change somewhat. Council housing, local authority housing developed over a period, but particularly in the period after the Second World War. There was a big expansion of council housing, and there was a lot wrong with it, by the way. It's not perfect, but it had standards. If you take Grenfell Tower and the fire, the architects who built Grenfell Tower designed it so that fires would not spread in tower blocks like Grenfell Tower. They met certain standards, and so that by 1979, half the population or so lived in council housing. And since 1979, we've had, under every single government since then, an attack on public housing, an attack on council housing, privatisation, deregulation of that housing, because, of course, council housing is taken outside of the market, and what we've had from government since 1979 is that everything should be put back into the market, that the market should reign supreme, and we don't like these areas that are outside of the market. And when we talk about the market operates on the basis of profit. So what they want is everything, whether it's housing, whether it's the cars we buy, the food we buy, the housing we live in, or the health service actually that we use, they want it run for the benefit of profit. And that's what's driven a lot of these developments. So whether it's privatisation of council housing, or the so-called regenerations that are taking place in many of our local authority estates across the country, and I have to say, sadly, many of them driven by Labour local authorities, this drive towards marketising housing has been at the core of it. So Grenfell Tower goes to the heart of that debate. Now, it was a horrific event, and as I said yesterday, if you listen to the accounts of people, it is hard to keep control of your emotions, to be honest, to hear the stories of people who survived or the stories of people who didn't survive. It is harrowing to listen to that. I've spoken to many, not all by any means, of the firefighters who attended that evening. The stories they tell me are harrowing in terms of their experience. I've, in 34 years of working in this industry, I've never heard the sort of stories that are coming out from firefighters about Grenfell Tower. We saw heroism. We saw heroism from residents. We saw heroism from firefighters and other workers. We saw marvellous examples of humanity and solidarity. If you take the days after the fire, when actually those in authority, supposed to be in authority, were completely absent. The Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea were nowhere to be seen, and I was in the area lots of times. What you did see is a local community coming together to self-organise, to provide food, to provide clothing, to provide support for people, but you didn't see agencies there. People gave lots of money, and people are still asking, where's all the money gone that people have donated through official charities and so on? Where has it? Because residents are complaining they haven't had much of that. You had appalling treatment of the people who've been displaced, and I think Jeremy Corbyn made a fantastic point, that flights are cancelled every day at Heathrow Airport, and just like that they can find hotels to put people in, and yet after Grenfell Tower, these working class people were sleeping on the streets as a result of that happening. What a disgusting situation. Our members clearly played a key role in that event, and they saved lots of lives, and tragically they didn't save enough lives, and that's something that I think many of them feel very difficult about. But they did a remarkable job. And what we've said, there's now going to be this public inquiry, and there's been a row about the terms of reference for that public inquiry, where it seems to us and many commentators that the government seeks to narrow the terms of reference of that inquiry as to what happened on the night and what happened afterwards. Well, for us, there's a lot of things about what happened before that need to be addressed if you're going to get to the heart of what happened at Grenfell Tower. And we've said very clearly that actually the residents, the survivors, the bereaved need to be at the heart of that process, as do people who've got a special interest such as ourselves, because the truth is this in terms of firefighters, and I've never seen this at this scale before, because of the scale of what happened, all the protections that workers have the right to expect, including emergency service workers, including firefighters. Firefighters don't go to work expecting to be injured or killed. Firefighters go to work expecting to put their training into practice to deal with hazardous situations in a safe and effective and professional way. None of that could be done at Grenfell Tower. So those people very clearly, and they knew it, were going into a situation where their safety and their lives were at risk. So we think we've got a right to have something to say about Grenfell Tower. And the question, so when people say, is this about austerity? Austerity comes into it, but it's a much more detailed story than simply austerity over the past 7 years or so. Because it raises how the hell can you put flammable cladding onto buildings? How can it even happen? It's just staggering. And when you sit back and look at it, and look at that building going up like a Roman candle. And I spoke to a fire engineer as it was happening, and he said, we picked up the phone and said, you need to turn the television on. And he said, surely that's impossible. And I said, well, it's not impossible, is it? Because it's happening. How can it happen? Because in 1999, at a fire in Scotland, where cladding was involved and one person died, we raised the issue of cladding on buildings from 1999 onwards. So this isn't something that's happened since 2010. This is something that has been going on for a considerable time. You may be aware of another fire at Lakenhall House in the London Borough of Southwark, where 6 people died. And that wasn't about cladding, but it was about alterations, so-called renovations, to a pre-existing block. And the problem with renovating some of these blocks is, as I say, the architects designed fire safety into the building. If you then alter the structure of that building, you may compromise the fire protection that was designed at the start of it. And that's clearly what happened at Lakenhall House. And it's clearly what's happened here again at Grenfell Tower. But in relation to Lacknell House, a coroner held an inquest and made recommendations. So why haven't those recommendations been implemented? Or we've had cases of firefighters, and we've had firefighters killed in tower block fires over the recent years. And again, coroners hold an inquest, and we present evidence, and coroners make recommendations. So why haven't those recommendations been implemented? There is a systematic failure here. And when they say don't politicise this, the truth is that behind all of this is, when you trace it back, it's a series of decisions, and those decisions are either made by local politicians or they've been made by national politicians. So by definition, they are political decisions, and therefore the issue is political. And I'll just mention some of them. To build or change a building, you have to go through building control, traditionally a local authority service. But under the Tory government after 1979, building control was privatised, deregulated. So if you want to, you can choose a private route to go through for your building control. And another fire engineer told me about a case, because people think the fire service have got this marvellous control. If the fire service said, you can't do that, everyone said, oh, fine, we won't do it then. Kingston Hospital, where they built an extension, and the building control officer, private building control officer, the fire service went along and said, we've got a problem with this plan because of access for fire engines in the event of a fire. And the response was, thanks very much for your input. Goodbye. We're carrying on with the plan. So there is no veto by the fire service on this. The Regulatory Reform Order of 2005 effectively introduced self-regulation in terms of fire safety in buildings. Fire assessors. Again, you go to do a risk assessment of your premises. So what that regulation said is that fire safety the responsibility sits with the owner or the occupier. They have to have fire risk assessments. So you might think fire risk, that sounds a pretty important job. Well, you can set yourself up as a fire risk assessor, put an advert on the internet, and tout for work as a fire risk assessor. We had a member of ours killed in a hair products storage shop in Manchester in 2013. And the coroner, again, found that the person who had done the fire risk assessment had no qualifications whatsoever, had simply announced himself as a fire risk assessor. That shop had gone to him, he'd done a so-called risk assessment, and that was a factor the coroner identified in the death of that firefighter. So privatisation of fire risk assessments and a complete lack of regulation of fire risk assessments. Then fire safety audits, the fire service's role is then to come and audit those fire risk assessments, which may have been done by someone, as I say, with no qualifications whatsoever. The specialist fire safety officers, we've lost something like 60% of those since 2005. And if you think about it, if you lose 2/3 of your specialist workforce and you're asked to do these audits, there's two things that can happen. Either you do fewer of them, or you do them at a lower quality, or you do both. And until recently, the Department for Communities and Local Government was boasting that they had managed to cut the time for a fire inspection significantly over recent years. And isn't this good for business? Because you're not tied up talking to fire officers, you can get on with running your business. I can go on, there's a whole series of these. And the truth is this, that when you have governments who endlessly say they are going to get rid of red tape, when the former Prime Minister David Cameron describes health and safety as a monster that must be slain, we will slay the monster of health and safety. When they say that for every regulation that they bring in, you have to get rid of 2, then you create the environment where Grenfell Tower can happen. And what we're saying in relation to this inquiry is actually we want everyone to be held to account. We want to know which minister made the decision to change a regulation. We want to know who gave them the advice to change that regulation. We want to know within the department what the discussion was. We want to know why they dismissed the advice of the Fire Brigades Union or of other specialists. And that will go to the heart of it. And I think you will find that actually there's a whole series of very senior politicians who've played a role in creating the regime whereby Grenfell Tower can happen. And I'll finish on this point, that if there are people to be held to account and charged with criminal activity, then fair enough. But for me, the idea, for example, that what we find is some subcontractor who screwed a bit of cladding onto a wall is the person who gets charged and goes to prison, I think completely misses the real criminals in this story, the people who allow the regulations whereby that can even happen, and the people who create the endless system of subcontractors whereby you probably never find out who actually screwed the bit of cladding onto the wall at Grenfell Tower. They've created a nightmare scenario, and we've now seen the nightmare result of that scenario that they've created. This is a national political scandal, and we should make sure that that national political scandal, that we shout it from the rooftops, and we stand with the residents calling for justice for Grenfell. Thank you.
Thanks to Matt for that sombre reflection on what have been some very serious events in our country this summer.